Hello and welcome back to the Toronto Website Developer.com. I am Peter Jaworski, the Toronto Website Developer specializing in Drupal. And this is the 6th video tutorial in this 10-part video tutorial series on views. In the last video tutorial we took a look at theming views, and now we get to look at the cool world of contextual filters and relationships. Pretty exciting stuff, and also some pretty confusing stuff for new Drupal users. So to start off, we'll look at relationships, and we'll dive back in where we left off. So you remember we changed some theming for our view, so we changed the title here and what it actually looked like. We added some padding. I removed some of the more extreme changes in CSS just to show you, or rather just to take it out so that it's a little bit more readable. But let's go in and actually change this up, and we'll add some author information. You remember we did this previously, and all that we could pull in was the UID of a specific user. We couldn't actually pull in the information of the user. So I'll just show you what I mean by that. So if I go ahead and I go to add, I can go to content, and I can choose the author UID. And you'll see here, if you need more fields than the UID, add a content author relationship. So here I've got no ability to pick from user, so I'm a little bit limited. Before I actually show you relationships, let's take a step back and we'll look at how relationships actually work and what they are. So I guess first thing to look at is the views module itself. Essentially, views is a query builder. So if you remember, if we were writing our own SQL, we'd be going select from where, right? But views makes that a little bit easier, and that gives us a graphical user interface to do that. So what we're actually doing when we pull in content is we're looking at the node table, and we're specifically relying on the NID. So if we want to pull in information from the user table, just going to add some spacing here, user table, the primary key for the user table is actually the UID. So we have a problem because these don't equal each other. NID can't relate to the UID. So what we have to do is introduce a relationship. And so what the relationship does is it looks at our node table, and we have NID, but we also have UID. And then so the UID can then link up to the user table, whereby UID is equal to UID, and then we can pull in information related to that. So essentially you have your node table, you have your user table. In the node table, you're going to have an NID, so the ID of your specific node. You're also going to have the user ID of the user that created that. That user ID is going to be linked to the primary key in the user table, where you can then pull in information from the user. You can't do that originally because NID does not equal UID. So let's head back over here and let's take a look at how that relationship works. We're going to go ahead and click add, and we're going to choose content, and here we've got content author. So we'll go ahead and we'll add that. And now this identifier is going to be the author, so it's whoever the author of the content is, and we're going to require this relationship. Every piece of content that we have is going to have an author, so we don't have to require this because there will always be one. If you have a piece of content, so let's say it's a taxonomy term, you could have nodes that have taxonomy terms or don't have taxonomy terms. If they didn't have a taxonomy term, you said require this relationship, that node without a taxonomy term would not be shown. So that's kind of what this relates to. So we'll go ahead and we're going to actually override this just so it applies to our new page. And actually I should cancel this and create a new display. Sorry, bear with me. Go ahead and hit add. Actually, no, we won't. That'll be the next step. I'm sorry for confusing this. So again, we're going to go back into content author. We'll hit override, so it just displays to all dog images. And now we can go ahead and click add. And if we go to filter, we see we now have user. So we can go ahead user, and we have all this information that we can pull in from the user. So let's go ahead and add the user name. So this will give us the actual author who's uploaded the image. And you'll see here we have the ability to choose the relationship. There's only one, so that's why it's automatically selected. We'll create the label, and we'll say this is the author name. And we don't have to put a colon because it will place one. And we can link it to the actual user, so we'll go ahead and hit apply. Now when we save this, and we scroll down, you'll see here we've got author name Ringo, author name Paul, author name Peter, author name Jaworski. All the authors that have added this, we now have their name and we can link to their specific their profile. So that's kind of how relationships work at a high level. Hopefully that helps and answers some questions. I've got a lot of questions about relationships, but they're pretty straightforward. Essentially, just remember, in terms of your select statement, or rather your SQL, the relationship is related to the from. So from, you actually would be inserting here your relationship where the node table, the UID is equal to user table UID. So that's where that pops in. It's in the from statement. Whereas contextual filters actually dynamically are created through for the where statement. But I'll come back to that when we actually go ahead and we do that. One last thing that I'll show you here is if we go to configuration, people, account, manage, you'll see that I've added a favorite dog name to a user. I can then now go ahead and go add field. And I can pull in that user's favorite dog. And of course, we'll look for a dog. Nope. Favorite dog name. Go ahead and hit apply. Right, and so it goes ahead and adds that. We can apply that as well. So for more sophisticated views, you can go ahead, if you're pulling in user information, add a whole bunch of profile information and then pull it in by linking the UID to whatever piece of content you're looking at, right? So now I can see that favorite dog name is Bo, favorite dog name is Dexter, favorite dog name is Dumbo, and so on. So that's relationships. They're pretty straightforward. I find, I had a tough time wrapping my head around them, and then, I saw a couple video tutorials myself from Drupal camps where they explicitly explained it like this. Essentially, views is your query builder, and relationships kind of plug into the from part of your query. So for me, that really helps solidify the understanding of relationships, and so hopefully it'll do the same for you. They're pretty powerful. You can definitely take this well beyond where we are, but now we'll look at kind of the contextual filters. So as I mentioned, contextual filters are kind of your where statement. So the filters that we have here, published equals yes, content type equals dog pictures, these don't change. They're always going to stay as we always want to see published pictures, we always want to see dog pictures. And so views can automatically plop those in as a where statement, where type is equal to, there should be, where type is equal to dog image, right? But what we want to do now is we want to create a view for our users to see what dogs that they've uploaded, what images they've uploaded. And I can't add that as a filter because I never know what user is going to actually be looking at that. That's where a contextual filter comes into play. The contextual meaning the context that the view is being displayed. So what we can do here is views will dynamically pull in some value. So what we're going to actually use is the UID, and it's equal to, and it'll use a placeholder, right? And that placeholder is something that we will give it. And you can do that in a variety of ways. So let's go ahead and look at that. So right now I'm just going to go ahead and add a display. And I'm going to rename this as, so it's a page display. So I'm going to say dogs uploaded by user. So go ahead and apply that. So now we've got this. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually add this onto the existing path for all users, which is obviously user slash and then a %, because that's going to be the argument that they receive. And then it'll be my images. We can go ahead and apply that. And what we'd like to see happen, and I'll just show you briefly, is we want this tacked on as an existing menu tab when a user goes to my account. So they'll go to my account, and then we want to have my images right here. So we can do that by adding a menu tab. And so this is my images. This is part of the user menu. Go ahead and apply that. Now if we save this, we can go, we'll reload my account, and I'll head back over to views here. And you'll see now we have my images, but when we click on it, we see all the images, right? We see Jaworsk, we see Peter, we see Paul, we see Ringo. We don't just see specifically the images logged in by the user. So let's go ahead and add our contextual filter. And when you do this, you have a whole host of options, right? And so the programmatic side of all these modules, when they tie into views, or views comes with a number of set defaults, so like the node table and that kind of thing, it declares what you can use as an argument. So you could install some modules that say they tie into views, but they don't offer arguments for specific fields or whatnot. That could be a problem and might just be something you want to flag. So if you're looking for contributed module arguments, that might be the reason why you don't have them. But here, what we want to do is we actually want to use the user, right? We know we're looking for their UID, so we can scroll down, and here's the user ID. Some of the most common ones that you'll use will be UID, NID, maybe a comment ID. I've seen a couple other cases where, what did we use? Location ID, right, as an argument, so using the location module. So couple different options. Now, once you actually add this, there's the ability to relate it to the relationship that's existing. We'll leave that for now. And what we want to do here is when the filter value is not in the URL. So there are a couple options here. You can provide a default argument to the contextual filter, or you can make sure that it's always in the URL, or you can display a summary if it's not in the URL, a bunch of different things here, right? So if our filter is not in the URL, we know that somebody is not looking at a profile page. So they're not looking at user / a user ID / my images. So what we want to do is display page not found, right? Because essentially they're not on the right page, so we don't want to do that. So if they put in user / what is this page / my images, we know that not proper, so we don't want to show anything. So we can go ahead, when the filter is in the URL, where default is provided, we can go ahead and we can override the title. The reason why we want to do that is, if we weren't using the UID here, but we were using the user's name, we could go ahead and say, Peter's images, right? We could also override the breadcrumb, so it's dynamic. It will use the argument that you have, and it will populate a piece of content, being the title, the breadcrumb, so that it's specific to what you're looking at. Lastly, to specify validation criteria. So essentially this validation criteria, it allows you to check the argument and make sure that it meets certain standards. So those standards could be, for user ID that we're using, is this user of a specific role? So if we only want logged in users, registered users to see dog images, by user on the site, we can restrict that here. So in terms of basic validation, we can look at the content, we can look at numeric, PHP code. We want to look at the user, right? And so we're only going to allow numeric UIDs. So it's not going to work if it's user / Peter / my images, right? It's only going to work if it's user /1 / my image. We can also restrict it based on role, what we were talking about. So we'll go ahead and we'll authenticate the user to make sure that they're actually logged in. And if it doesn't actually validate, so if it's not a numeric UID or they're not logged in, it'll show a page not found. And so we can go ahead and hit apply. And this actually will cancel that. We're going to apply this to this page only. And now when we go ahead and save this, we'll reload our dog images here. And you'll see here now, we've got author name Jaworsk, author name Jaworsk, author name Jaworsk, author name Jaworsk, author name Jaworsk. All of my specific images. And if I log in as Ringo, let's say, Ringo's looking at them, sees the same thing. If he goes to his account, goes to my images, Ringo's got his one dog image. Same can be said for all the other users. They can go into Peter, Paul, and all they'll see is this view, which is their specific images. That's where it's a dynamic filter, right? So we're filtering the content based on the argument that's provided right here. Now let's say that we want to abstract this. So we want this tab to be available for all users once they're logged in. So rather than it be a tab here where it's my images, we want it to be universal. So it'll just be your images right here beside dog images, right? So let's go ahead and change that up, and I'll show you how we're going to provide a default value. So this is something that you'll also be doing a little bit more frequently. So we're going to change this path, and we're not logged in as the super admins. We're going to change that. And in case you're curious how I'm switching back and forth, that's the devel module. That's the switch users block. So I'm going to go ahead and go users, and I'm going to add this as my, or rather, user images, right? So we'll go ahead and apply that. Make this a normal tab. You remember we covered this off in another earlier video tutorial. We're going to put this in, I want to say it's main menu, but we'll have to test that out. So we'll go ahead and hit apply. Let's just make sure that that showed up properly. So if we reload this page, now we have my images, right? But it's showing everybody again, which is a bit of a problem because we're not looking for a specific user here. So what we need to do is here, this UID, we're going to actually, when the filter is not in the URL, obviously this is displayed all, so this should have been show page not found. I'll show you what that actually looks like. We'll save that. When we reload this page, see, we should have page not found, right? Because we don't have the actual argument in the URL here, so that's why we're getting that page not found, so that obviously works properly. So what we need to do is we need to provide a default value. And so you have a bunch of different options here. The content ID from the URL, that's to get the node ID. So if we were using a node as an argument, you could use that to automatically pull in the node ID. You could use a fixed value, so it could be always be something, you know, maybe it's all if you're looking at taxonomy terms or something like that. PHP code allows you to actually write in some PHP and return a value that will be the argument. So that's pretty handy. And again, a raw value from the URL, I've never used that. I don't think you'd ever want to use that. But then again, you have a taxonomy term ID from the URL. So again, we were talking about taxonomy, so you can provide a default for that. And then you can get the user ID from the URL, right, which is what we talked about from before if you're on a user page. But what we're looking for is the user ID from the logged in user. So what this will do is it'll look at who's actually browsing the site and pull in their UID and use that as an argument. So we're going to provide that default here, so that's what we're getting. But then what we want to do is we want to make sure to specify some validation criteria, right? Because if that user doesn't have a value, if they're an anonymous user, we might not want to show this. So we can do a user, and we're going to make sure that you know, we can allow both numeric. That doesn't really matter, right? Because we're providing a default. But we want to restrict this based on a user role, and we only want this to be for authenticated users. And if they're not authenticated users, if it doesn't validate, they're going to get a page not found. A little bit of an ugly situation there. You don't want, you know, your anonymous user to find page not found. We could do no results found, and then we could, you know, add an empty message or whatnot, or just display a summary. But we'll do page not found for now. Typically what we would end up doing here is, you know, if we're restricting it, we would just do a permission for restrict that to, you know, certain user types. But just for argument's sake here, we'll leave that as the validation criteria. We'll go ahead and save this. Now when we reload our page, we can see that because I'm logged in as Jaworsk, my images is pulling in all of the Jaworsk images. But if I change this, and I'm not changing the actual page, I'm just logging in as Ringo, Ringo sees one image. Same thing for Paul. Paul logs in, looks at the same page, it's all user images, but all that he sees is his specific image because it's dynamically pulling in the UID from the user that's logged in. So this UID is being pulled in from who's ever looking at it. And this is being added to the where clause, right? So now it's restricting our return value from SQL based on a dynamic value, and that value is being pulled in from the user ID. But this could be any dynamic value. So that's really relationships and contextual filters in a nutshell. Just headed back over to contextual filters, just run you through some of the more common ones. So obviously we talked about the user ID. Sometimes you want to use the node ID. So, you know, if you have a block that pulls in specific information for a node, if you have them tied together through maybe a node reference, I do have a video tutorial on that. You can use that as an argument. Some of the other ones, you know, maybe if you have a really active site, you can use the actual date. You know, today's date as a, you know, content thing, so it'll show your most recent. You can also do that if you're doing a comments listing, use today's date, show all the comments from today. node ID, comment ID, user ID. Those are pretty much the most common that I've used. I'm sure there are lots of other ones out there. If you do have one or any questions, please let me know. And then in terms of relationships, I mean, author relationship is often pretty common. You'll also have a node relationship, right? If you can relate things on the node. Locations. Sometimes if you're using the location module, I think those are the most common that I've run across. But I'm sure there are plenty more out there, especially if you're using other modules like the flag module or user relationships, that kind of thing. You can introduce a number of different relationships. Taxonomy is always a key one. Views comes with its own taxonomy override. So I hope this helped. I hope it was pretty straightforward. Contextual filters and relationships are pretty complex. If you have any questions, post them. Make sure to put them on the site, or you can always post them on YouTube. I monitor both. And again, if these video tutorials are helping you, please throw a thumbs up. It goes a long way. I love seeing those, and I love seeing the comments that tell me how much these are helping out. It's good to have that feedback so I know where to keep the videos going, tempo, and what we're covering. So again, appreciate you viewing, and we'll see you in video tutorial number 7 of 10.